Assistant Administrator, have a seat. Let's have a talk.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it. Hey. Yeah.
You know, the last couple of weeks we've been working together to hatch out a plan for this conversation. And after how this summit has been going the last few days, we got together last night. We met for the first time. We realized we're both neighbors in Madison. And we threw out our script. Here's our script. We're kind of throwing that out over there. And we're going to have a real conversation because there were some real interesting threads that came through the One Water topic the last couple days around affordability, equity, and collaboration. And so we wanted to start there and with those talks. And I wanted to get Dave's thoughts. He's the head water regulator in the country. So if we want to get things done, we need Dave to help. But I'm going to talk in terms of we, because it's just not the EPA doing anything. It's all of us. Some of those comments in the last dialogue are part of this. So Dave, you know, you have your roots in Madison, and even though you're moving to Washington, or you have moved to Washington, D.C. in January to take on this important job, tell me why your roots are in Madison and why they're going to likely stay there for a long time.
Well, thanks, Michael. I appreciate it. And since we're off script, I'm going to hijack for a second.
Oh, boy, I said not to do that.
I promised last night I wouldn't, but, you know, that was last night. One, I just want to start with Radhika, Courtney, the team at U.S. Water Alliance. I got to get to know some of you last night, and I'm really impressed. I took a look at the agenda for this conference, this summit, on the plane ride out last night, and I was disappointed that I wasn't here earlier. And so this is the right approach. You know, we ask, how do we talk about One Water? How do we talk about water resources in this country? This is it. This is not a binary topic. Environmental issues are not, you know, either you're for or against. You know, the woman from Mississippi, Jackson, I thought it's a shared ownership concept. That's brilliant. Thank you. This is the right approach. Getting people from diverse viewpoints in a room and talking about it is a great first step, and so congratulations. So I'd like to give U.S. Water Alliance a round of applause. Thank
you. David, the question I asked you?
I can't remember. What was it?
Your roots in Madison?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, so, someone earlier in the panel talked about connection to waterway. And so why I do what I do and why I am interested in water resources is a connection. I grew up in Wisconsin. It's a water-based state. One of my all-time favorite places is Lake Mendota in Wisconsin, the Terrace, University of Wisconsin-Madison. And you sit along Lake Mendota on the terrace in those chairs, and you feel connection to that waterway. And so I was just there last week. And you have that kind of connection to that waterway. At the same time, I'm staring at algae in my favorite lake. And I know, in fact, there's an amazing work done, and you've been part of it, cleaning up those lakes. And so you feel connected to that waterway, and yet it's a reminder of our work to be done.
It is.
And so I went to undergrad in Madison. I developed that connection, and I always wanted to get back to Madison. I've had a kind of a wandering career path that has provided me the opportunity to learn in each different job that I've had that has, I think, given me the ability to try to take on this job. Whether or not it was starting out in California, I worked on water reuse, turning wastewater to drinking water back in the mid-90s. It's going to be, one of the reasons why I went to law school coming out of that project is we didn't really have a regulatory framework for water reuse. A really great, we had the scientists, we had the economists, we had everybody with degrees in the room, but the overcoming the ick factor of reusing wastewater to drinking water, and then also the regulatory framework. And 20 years later, I'm now in a seat that I can do something about that. So I began my career in water repurification, wastewater treatment, and moved my way through. Lived in Vermont, got a law degree in Vermont. It's a different area of the country. I spent some time back in Wisconsin working for the regulated community. I was out in Washington, D.C., learning how to deal with, big federal government. I've spent some time in Wyoming learning about Western water resource issues as a lead water quality attorney for the state of Wyoming. spent some time in Wisconsin as the lead environmental prosecutor, so putting a different hat on. So all of
Very,
those different,
very varied career.
yeah. So all of those
And,
different perspectives allow me to sit down and talk to you about where we're going next.
So now that's what we're going to get to. Let's get to the good stuff here. Regulatory flexibility. Think back to February 2011. It was a sleety day in Madison, Wisconsin, and a bunch of us from Madison drove halfway between Chicago and Madison to have a meeting with EPA officials in a county building with unfolding metal chairs. And we sat down and we said, we have this new regulatory compliance strategy called Watershed Adaptive Management. We don't know what to do. We agreed, the EPA and people from the Madison, we agreed that but we were going to work together to solve this problem. That's all we did. We just committed to work together. Yeah. And here we are in 2018. We have a fully implemented program that with 30 partners that are going to clean up nutrients in the Yahara watershed, and we have funding secured for 20 years, and the business voluntarily giving money. And here we are, just a few years later. So I have this enormous sense of optimism, what can be done when we work together. But then I see that this type of regulatory flexibility is the exception, not the rule. Yeah, yeah. And so I was really interested in how do we make this approach the rule?
Yeah. Well, and I think that is, it's a challenging question. And now having spent time in both state government and now in federal government, it's this concept as a regulator, you sort of have this lens. I have a set of regulations, I must follow my regulations, and so you sort of kind of robotically move through a process. And what I'm trying to do, and perhaps with the broader background that I have, is broaden the horizon a bit and think outside the box. And so, that's a prime example of people being willing to sit down in a room, acknowledge a problem, and then think creatively. So, you talked about regulatory flexibility, working on variances, for example. Variances. So we have water quality standards and permit limits, and people get permits to discharge to waterways. And if you can't comply with the law, we have a process called variance. And it's an important tool. It's an important tool that allows people to, I don't have the money yet to come up to speed, and so we'll give a variance for a standard. My problem is that it's a back end, the back end sort of flexibility tool that we should be having the conversation at the front end. So rather than, as we're working to solve a problem, rather than relying on a variance, we should have the harder conversation up front about how to create the regulatory flexibility. And so we can talk about some examples that I'm working on to do that. But if you want to pivot this another.
No. Yeah. Give us one of your examples.
Well, I think where I'm spending a lot of my time, and obviously the conversation we had, which I thought that was a fantastic panel, by the way, is the nutrient space. I have been frustrated with the federal government over the years in kind of a one-size-fits-all approach to nutrient regulation, and anybody who spends some time with nutrients knows that it's a local issue. And so to try to have a national solution to a very local problem is trying to get people to think holistically about it. And so I'm spending significant amount of time with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. Bill Northey from Iowa. We have an Iowa contingent here. He's an amazing leader. What he's doing in Iowa to try to bring ag and stakeholders and government together, it's a model that I can learn from, and I'm spending a lot of time with Bill and USDA to focus on how do we bring the federal resources together. I'm meeting with the Department of Interior. We're forming this basically a kind of a sub-cabinet or a water sub-cabinet where the Department of Interior has resources with the Bureau of Reclamation and the U.S. Geologic Survey, and so they have the money to put monitors out into our waterways that my people at the EPA rely on. Right. Bill Northey has people, and USDA has people in every county in this country, and they have money that they work on that help farmers comply with this kind of large federal program. And so the three of us are, and with NOAA, and with the Department of Energy, and with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, we get together, we met earlier this week, to talk about how do we go after large ticket problems. And one of the things that we're going to focus on is nutrients. And so, we're going to, and I love the concept of moving down the Mississippi. We intend, I co-chair the hypoxia task force, and I had my first meeting a couple weeks after being confirmed. We're aiming at using the hypoxia task force and the Mississippi Basin as a way to make sure that we are looking holistically at solving problems in the nutrient space with the federal government at a very high level, and then working with the states, working with the local communities to try to.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And, well, the nutrients are, it's a perfect one water example. It's wastewater, it's stormwater, it's all types of water. And I know when we went into the adaptive management area, we realized internally we had to change how we operated to make that successful, because a normal approach would be, build a large treatment plant and remove the pollution, and we'd be done.
Yeah.
But it was too not cost effective. I'm wondering what you're doing within the walls of the EPA to deal with the cultural and kind of the values issues around that same type of thinking.
Well, the first thing is to look in the mirror, and so you talk about. I think very holistically about economics, and so we talked earlier in the earlier session about nutrient trading or wheeling money from urban areas into rural areas, and so we are taking a holistic look at creating new markets, working to look at our water trading policies, to find a way to incentivize people in the urban areas to wheel money out from a wastewater treatment plant, for example, out into rural areas where we can get more bang for your buck.
Sure.
And so we're looking at our trading policies, and we're looking at things like constructed wetlands. In the Midwest, you have drain tiles, and we should be using ecology, using the environment to help us treat those the pollutants that come off or nutrients that come off farm fields through drain tiles. And we don't use constructed wetlands, and I'm learning that my agency may be the impediment. Right. So our trading policies may be the impediment. So we're taking a holistic look at what we can do to incentivize markets, whether that's mitigation banking or constructed wetlands or trading to get money where we have it to money where we need it. And so that thinking outside the box of, do you spend $1 billion to upgrade a wastewater treatment plant, or can you spend $100 million out in the watershed to reduce nutrients? And it's not just wastewater. This is now a drinking water conversation.
It is drinking water.
Yeah, and so so I've with Peter Gravada, the head of our drinking water program, is here. He's an amazing leader, and Andrew Sawyer is our head of our wastewater program. He's an amazing leader. I need those two guys working together on nutrients, for example. It's wastewater and drinking water is now converged because Toledo. Governor Scott down in Florida just a few days ago issued a emergency declaration. City of Salem out in Oregon a few weeks ago had to shut off water to a couple 100,000 people because of toxic algae blooms. And so this is an issue that's been building over the decades, and it's not getting better, it's getting worse, despite the federal government spending significant time and effort on it. And so I'm thinking holistically on how to tackle it.
That's really good. That's really going to be important. I wanted to switch gears and talk about the affordability dichotomy.
Yep.
We've heard through this conference that our infrastructure, at least at our treatment plants, but many of our systems were built with federal grants and built new, and all of those systems are coming to term. At the same time, there's a growing disparity in our communities around income gaps and ability to pay. Yeah. And so as utility leaders, we're struggling with, we need more money, but the community's ability to absorb what's needed to be done is more difficult. And I'm wondering, I know EPA has done a lot of thinking around this, and I'm interested in your thoughts about how we tackle this together.
Well, it's affordability, integrated planning. These are catchwords that are concepts, and we're implementing them in certain areas. But we need to now take concepts into real live implementation. I cut my teeth on the affordability issue without even know what the term meant.
Before affordability was cool?
Yeah, before affordability was cool. But I was asked to prosecute small rural drinking water systems, and that come out of compliance. And in a lot of situations, we talk about infrastructure, but it's also human capital. Fred retired in a small rural community, and that community becomes out of compliance. And as a prosecutor, I'm asked to bring them back into compliance in a community that doesn't have the money to do it. It doesn't have, the support that it may need as a rate base. The larger cities is difficult, politically difficult to raise money, but you can't tap into a rate base in a small community. And so what do I do about it? And so I had real world examples in the rural communities about how do you bring them into compliance? And so we're spending a lot of time with, it's an all-of-the-above strategy, but affordability, we have a water finance center, we've got a infrastructure loan programs that we're trying to figure out a way to either bundle loan applications under some of our new loan programs, so you get rural communities coming in under, the state of Indiana is holistically going after some really large federal loans, $500 million, that they can bundle projects together. So bundling is a concept. Private-public partnerships are a concept. Kentucky brought the number of communities, drinking water systems from several thousand down to several hundred. I'm not quite sure about the numbers, but consolidation. All of these concepts are out there. There are models out there, and we're taking a long, hard look at how to roll those out as kind of a national model.
Excellent, excellent. Lead. We heard here at the meeting around what's happening in Flint and Detroit. In Madison, many years ago, there was a courageous decision to remove all the lead pipes. Yeah. And it was tough, and there was a lot of political heat for it. And I'm just wondering, I know that the EPA has a war on lead. Yep. I'm just wanted to know more about what's happening with the war on lead.
Well, it's a high priority for the agency, and I want to pause. We've made great progress in lead in drinking water systems and lead paint in our buildings. Air deposition issues, contaminated sites around the country. We have a 1991 rule that really has moved lead into we've made great progress. But I will tell you, when I took over, I was disappointed about the lack of progress in the rulemaking over the last decade. I think we have recognized the need to update the lead and copper rule, which is the major federal rule that governs how utilities deliver water and manage water systems and corrosion control and things like that. There were things that the federal government could have done sooner, and so I was disappointed that we had some missed opportunity. And so my job is to have the political will to take this on. And I have the support of my senior management to do that. The issue with Flint, and it is an ongoing issue, and whoever had that comment, thank you. But I look at, Flint was a problem, but in the history of the environmental movement, it's also, we have to look at these things as opportunities. We had rivers on fire, and we had Clean Water Act as a result. We have, major times in the environmental movement where we're reminded that we're not delivering for the American public. We're not delivering for our state citizens. And the Flint issue is an example of we're not there yet. And so I look at it as an opportunity to develop the willpower to fix it. Taking it on is it's a $50-60 billion problem. And to try to go to especially the rural or disadvantaged communities and say, you have to take your lead service lines out, how do you do that? It's a lot of the times I talk to the Conference of Mayors and say, well, happy to do it. Federal government, give us the money to do it. And that's why I love the comment from the woman from Mississippi. It's shared ownership. They're federal citizens, they're state citizens, they're county citizens, they're local citizens, they're all of our citizens, and therefore all of us have equity in solving this problem. Mm-hmm. And so we are going to update the lead and copper rule. We are also working holistically with our other agencies in air and our toxics program to take a look at lead, other sources of lead, holistically in the environment. And we're taking it on. And we're on a rulemaking schedule. Peter spends a lot of his time working on a rule that we will update in the next year.
Excellent. I just want to do a time check. How am I doing on time? 5 minutes? Thank you.
Yep.
Well, I'm wondering, when you go back to Washington, what's going to be your focus for the next, as we round out this fireside chat? Yeah. What do you want to get done, besides all the things we just talked about?
Yeah, well, that's the daunting thing about this position. I knew it was big. I knew it was it's an ultra important. I mean, this is my bucket list job. I mean, this is what I want to do with my career, and it's an absolute honor to be sitting here, but it is terrifying. You know, the topics that come across my desk every day, what do you focus on? You know, we have perfluorinated compounds, communities that worry about perfluorinated compounds, communities next door worried about lead and copper or lead in drinking water. You know, I've got nutrients and I've got harmful algae blooms that are knocking out drinking water systems, and you can't do all of it all at once. And so how do you prioritize what we focus on and recognize that it's important to everybody, but we have to, we're in a budget-constrained environment. We all are, and I recognize that. And so I have to make the hard decisions about how do we use our money, how do we use our shared resources to focus in on certain areas. What I'm going to focus in on is aging infrastructure. And I'm worried in the aging infrastructure component is I'm a long view person, and someone said, you know, we have to think 7 generations down. I agree with that. What I'm thinking about is if you look holistically at macroeconomics, we have urbanization. People are coming from rural communities and our cities are getting bigger. And so rather than spending money on aging infrastructure, we're spending money on capacity development. Yes. And so you have rate bases coming into the cities, capacity draining out of the rural America, and we're spending our money on building bigger and not replacing old. And so we're really going to focus our loan programs on aging infrastructure. We have new money from Congress. You know, my office went up, which is remarkable in today's world. And so we've got additional loan money to use. So aging infrastructure. I'm going to focus on nutrients. Really focus on, and it's a surface water and a drinking water issue, and I'm going to spend a lot of my time. I've hired a woman, Anna Wildeman, who's an amazing lawyer, worked with us in another Madison, stole her out of the state of Wisconsin, and her task is to think holistically and work nutrients, and we're willing to fail trying to come up with a holistic way of rethinking the way we deal with nutrients. Working on some perfluorinated compounds. We had our National Leadership Summit in D.C. That was a great event because it's like this. We get in a room, we talk, we hear from experts. We're out doing listening sessions on that around the country. And so those are some of the high-value, high topics that I'm working on.
Well, we have this diverse crowd here of people who are committed to do things, to join you in moving this forward. From the U.S. Water Alliance and people all around the country. What can we do to join you in this effort to tackle all these tough issues?
Yeah. Well, it's taking conferences and translating them into dialogue, into engagement. You know, I believe strongly in cooperative federalism. You know, what does that mean? You ask 10 people and you get 14 different answers. But you know, there's big federal government and there's state government and there's local government. I believe as a touchstone that we need to get resource decisions to the people who know the resources best. And that's the people who live next to the water. We heard the mayor, you know, that the entire community lives within a couple hundred feet of the river. So they know their resources best, and so we have to get out and find a way to engage with our states and our local communities. And so how do we do that? There's been an institutional way of doing business with the federal government, and we do consultation, and that means we get together in a room and we sort of talk to people as opposed to have a dialogue with people. And so I'm looking for opportunities to engage either as part of our major rulemaking initiatives, this community listening sessions we're doing for perfluorinated compounds. Those are ways to get out into the community. But I'm open for suggestions because, quite frankly, the way the federal government has done it in the past is not good enough. And so I'm willing to work with the major, you know, the U.S. Water Alliance and others to try to figure out how to have this kind of conversation more often. I don't know if I have the answer, but I'm looking for one. So.
Well, I'll accept that invitation. Being chair of the One Water Council here at the U.S. Water Alliance, maybe you've given us something to think about over the next couple of months and figure out how we can do that.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks,
much.
Michael. I appreciate it. Yep.